I believe we have a quick update on the Frank Hester story, Natasha. You've picked something up just in the last few minutes.
You said that you couldn't keep up with this story today, Andrew, and neither can I. But yes, we've just had word in the last few minutes. A spokesperson for the Prime Minister has said the comments allegedly made by Frank Hester were racist and wrong.
Eventually, we get there.
But we've finally got there. The Prime Minister now finally does believe that these comments are racist and wrong. He has now rightly apologised for the offence shown, and where remorse is shown, it should be accepted. Now, that doesn't sound to me like the Prime Minister would like him to see that £10 million donation to the Conservative Party returned, and he is obviously reflecting the words as well of his business secretary, Kemi Badenoch, who has said that when he has said sorry, that he essentially should be forgiven for these remarks, and he has come out and said that. I wonder if it will be enough for some MPs who are saying, actually, we believe that his comments were very much about Diane Abbott's race and very much about her gender as well. But it now seems that finally the Prime Minister has been pushed into saying this by his own business secretary.
Better late than never. And on the donations, knock me down with a feather. Natasha, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, I think it's fair to say the government have somewhat lost control of what should have been their extremism week. Well, in response to terrible polling and the defection of Lee Anderson to Reform UK, Number 10 let it be known that Boris Johnson is going to come back to help campaign in the red wall seats at the general election. Which is interesting. I didn't know that Mr Sunak and Mr Johnson were bezies again. To find out more, I'm joined by that close Johnson ally, Nadine Dorries. Nadine, good to see you there. Do you really believe that Boris Johnson is going to link arms with Rishi Sunak and get him out of this hole?
So Boris Johnson has conservatism running through his veins. Of course, he would want to help any MP or any candidate in a seat where they felt he could benefit and benefit them in winning that seat. But, you know, Rishi Sunak is actually riding on the coattails of 10 years of Boris Johnson's work. It was Boris Johnson who won the majority that Rishi Sunak is sitting in number 10, actually losing on a daily basis. And the idea that Boris Johnson could just go and crash around constituencies campaigning for MPs without there being some kind of formal arrangement in as much as how he does it, where he goes, what he says, because, of course, wherever he went, there'd be someone like you, Andrew, with a microphone in his mouth asking questions. And so just to give context here, I think I would imagine that Boris Johnson would want to campaign and to help the Conservative Party. We're in a very dangerous position at the moment where we were polling 18 points at the weekend, where Reform are consistently polling 12 points. If we drop much further and we become neck and neck with Reform, then that's wipeout for the Conservative. We're not talking about, only 150 MPs coming back. We're talking about virtually wipeout of the Conservative Party. But for it to happen, Boris Johnson is the former Prime Minister. He isn't, a former mayor or a former MP, or he's the former Prime Minister who won the majority that Rishi Sunak, who nobody voted for.
Yeah. I'm sorry to jump in, but there would have to be some kind of concordat between the two men. I was just, call me a sort of suspicious and mean-minded hack, but I was just slightly suspicious about the fact that all this came out the day after Lee Anderson had defected to Reform UK, and I wondered if it was a bit of spin, and I wonder whether there is really an agreement between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak about the things that you mentioned, and you're shaking your head.
Well, your hack's nose was absolutely, 100% bang on, as it always is. So Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak have not spoken for over a year. There is no rapprochement between the two. As you know, there were hostilities. Rishi Sunak was very much involved in the removal of Boris Johnson, and so they're not best friends. If Boris Johnson is going to go out on the campaign trail, and that story was there today on the front of the newspaper, to keep the Lee Anderson, the Reform story, off the front pages, and to make sure that nobody was talking about anything else, talking about that, but to make sure that we were doing what we are now, which is talking about Boris Johnson returns. The only way it worked, it was a great PR move, but also to calm the nerves of Conservative MPs who may be thinking about defecting, because I'm very sure conversations are taking place. I doubt it will happen, but I think it was to kill two birds. One, to say to those Conservative MPs who are agitating, look, Boris Johnson is going to go out. He is going to be in your constituency.
He's going to come and help you, yeah.
And the other was to keep the whole story of Lee Anderson defecting off the front pages. So it was a double PR swipe, really. But there is no arrangements. There is no plans for Boris Johnson to go on a campaign. What needs to happen for that to take place is Rishi Sunak needs to pick up the phone. Now, people have argued today, is Rishi Sunak big enough to do that? I'm not sure that he is. But, you know,
it wouldn't be a happy phone call for him, because he would have to ask. I'm not going to use the word beg, but he would have to ask very nicely.
He most certainly would. And there would have to be some kind of, as she said, concordat, an agreement about what Boris actually did do and when and what he was to say, because he will want to take the fight to Labour, which the Conservative Party seem to be doing at the moment. So he will want to have, you know, agreed lines to forms of attack.
To do that.
Labour, to go out and do that.
And that means working quite closely. Would that have to be preceded by an apology from the current Prime Minister to the previous one?
Do you know, honestly, Boris, I don't think he'll care about an apology. I don't think he'd be even remotely interested in that. This is the difference between Rishi and Boris. Boris will be interesting about limiting the damage that's been done to the Conservative Party by his removal and by the abandonment of the 2019 manifesto and every policy that we were elected on. He will be more interested in that and in getting something together to limit the damage. I've been of the opinion all the way along that why would Boris Johnson, who's a winner, he won 2 mayoral elections in London. We will never see that. We will never see a Conservative candidate win a mayoral election in London in mine or your lifetime, Andrew, again. He did it twice when, as we know, David just put him there to kind of sideline him and thought he was going to lose. So he won mayoral elections twice. He inflamed the Brexit campaign. You know, the polls only started moving on Leave when Boris Johnson joined, and he won a massive majority for the Conservative Party. I have always said, why would he want to break that winning legacy? Why would he want to save the backsides of MPs who removed him as a Prime Minister? But I think we've crossed Rubicon now, and I think his head will be in a place of the Conservative Party has to be saved.
Yeah.
And you know, Andrew,
Nadine, very interesting, but just before you go, your thought about the Frank Hester row that sort of set Westminster alight today. Should they give the money back?
Gosh, well, I have to say I've been looking after a 2-year-old all day, and I haven't been as following this, which is why I'm late onto the programme. My apologies. Okay. So I'm not quite as across this as you are. I've only heard the comments that were made, and the fact that, you know, I've written today in the Daily Mail, it's always the cover-up that gets you. The fact that anyone would try and fudge what he said as not being racist, I just don't understand why that would have happened. Should he give the money back? I'm just not going to comment on that because I'm not across the story as fully as you are, I'm afraid.